Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Bob's Woodshop. Today I'm spending the day with my friends over at Wally Kunkel's School of Professional Woodworking. It's known as Mr. Sawdust. Mr. Sawdust was Wally's father. So here's the outside of the building. Within the school there's another gentleman named Bob Gary, and Bob is a ex-shop teacher, and he also has a store where he sells vintage tools, which is the main topic of today's video. So sit back and relax and enjoy the show.
Hey Bob, welcome to Wally Kunkel's School of Professional Woodworking here in Hackettstown, New Jersey. And I'd like to have you come on into my tool room.
I've been looking forward to this. Thank you very much. It's a heck of a door. What's the deal with this door?
This is an old jail cell door that Wally did some horse trading to get, but it goes back probably to the late 1800s. And I'm not good, he'll lock me in there, so
Okay.
gotta make sure we behave here.
All right. So before we get started on the tools, why don't you tell me a little bit about Bob Gary?
Well, I'm a Navy veteran and a 30-year shop teacher in Randolph, New Jersey. I retired in 2010, and I had always worked on tools. That's one of my specialties, is antique tools. And so I decided when I retired, this would become a business that I do, is the restoration and selling of antique tools.
Okay.
And you'll see all kinds of hand tools here that go back to the 1800s. Some of them, like the metal planes, are more in the 1900s.
Right. Holy moly. You got
And
a lot.
all of these I've restored so that they are ready to use. The metal planes have been gone over, taken completely apart. The wood planes, those I left pretty much in the shape that I find them at, just a little bit of cleaning for the wooden planes.
Okay.
There are some pieces here that are more collectible, like the big Japanese saws and the augers and some of the broad axes and stuff. So those collectible tools here are very good user tools. Hand saws, back saws that are sharpened up, chisels in sharp, ready to use condition.
Quite a collection where you got it all in here. This is...
Well, one of the things that's enjoyable to find old tools and restore them. You know, finding a tool like this one up here is a Stanley 55 with 4 boxes of cutters, one of the most complex planes ever made.
Yeah, we'll come back to that for sure. I just want to give the audience a quick overview of the store. And you sell directly out of here, but also on eBay and in different auctions and woodworking shows?
Yeah, there's a lot of different venues that we have. The store is one of them because it's in the school, Mr. Sawdust School of Woodworking. But also on eBay is Take a Dip, and I do woodworking shows and always attend Martin Donnelly's Nashua show.
Okay, and Take a Dip is called Take a Dip. Why?
Because I live on Lake Hopatcon, and whenever I was coming home from work, my son was always saying, "What am I going to do?" And I was saying, "I'm going to take a dip." And so it became a kind of running joke that whenever I was doing anything down in the shop, that I'm taking a dip.
All right, so that's a quick overview of the shop. Let's look at some of the specialty things that you have in here. Let's start with these plow planes up here.
The plow planes are a plane from just making a groove. It's a single-use tool that has a blade on the bottom, and this blade usually comes in about 7 different widths. And this one, for example, has the threaded fence rods on it that can be adjusted. Earlier ones might have had a wedge locking in it, or it might have had thumb screws on top, and the fence can be adjusted from how far from the edge of the piece of wood you want to cut a groove in. What's unique with my plow planes is that I search high and low for blades for these. And it all depends on what plane you're using that the blades can be matched up to it. Because sometimes these blades won't work properly for a different plow plane because of the thickness and the way the grooves are made in the bottom. And so they do match up. You can't just use any blade in any plow plane.
So there's a big market for guys who just want to show these and display them, but these are also everyday users.
They can be. They were made back in the middle 1800s as everyday users as a plow plane. And for people who like doing hand tool woodworking, these are great options going back that far, or you can get into the metallic plow planes that Stanley made, like the Stanley 45 later on in the later 1800s.
Okay, so you have a Stanley 45 over here, right?
I do have a Stanley 45 that's here, okay, and here's one.
And
The same idea.
Isn't this one of the most complex planes ever built?
This one's pretty complex as far as it has different uses. It's a plow plane. It's also a beating plane, and it can be used for a tongue and groove. And so they call it a combination plane.
Right, because of all the cutters that you can
Because
get.
of all the cutters. There are another plane that's called a Stanley 55 that is definitely the most complex plane ever made. And this one has 4 boxes of cutters.
Oh,
What they're
my.
trying to do here, if you kind of pan over this area, is that all these wooden planes that you see up here, these side bead planes and these hollows and rounds and these different kinds of molding planes, Stanley was trying to help the woodworker not have to bring all of these different wooden planes to a job. They could bring this one plane and 4 different boxes of cutters.
Let's rotate that around because this is really an engineering marvel. What this is, because it's adjustable on where you're going to put the plow or the piece of molding.
And you see all the components are on this plane right now that it would have been manufactured with, but in use, you wouldn't have all these components on the plane as you're using them. You wouldn't have both the left and the right fence on at the same time. And so right now, it looks more complex than it would have been when you were actually using that plane. Then there's that cutter would go right down in the bottom there, depending on which one you're using.
Yeah, really
But
fascinating.
then they try to really make it special. The earlier ones had really nice designs in the metal. They used rosewood, really nice specialty wood, and nickel plated, make it shine back in the day. So these planes that Stanley made
So
definitely in competition with the old style woodworking planes that might have been made out of rosewood or boxwood.
right. So instead of having like a whole row of these, you could just use the 55. Or is it the 45?
Yep, you can use a 45 or a 55. The 55 is more complex than a 45.
Yeah.
I would say if you want a good user plane, then the 45 is where you start. Because it's not as complex. And so the 45 can be mastered in a couple of weekends,
Right.
of using this here and trying it out.
So really, that's the first mechanical router. Don't need a whole bunch of router bits. Don't need electricity. Tell me a little bit about the history of these transition planes.
Well, early on, the planes were all wood. Okay, so these planes made out of wood go back to the 1600s. And so you'll have a block plane like that.
So factories would make them, and carpenters would make their own also.
Yeah, carpenters would make their own. It wasn't until the middle 1700s, early 1700s, that you had professions making these molding planes and these wooden planes.
Right.
But later on, when Bailey patented the design of this mechanism with the frog and the adjuster and the chip breaker and all of this design, and they started coming out with the metal plane like this,
Right.
a lot of the woodworkers still like the feel of the old wooden bottom when you have the wood bottom working on wood. And so what Stanley did and other plane makers also did is they had a wooden bottom, but they included the adjustable part that Bailey patented, where now you have an easy adjustment for the depth. Because keep in mind, on these old planes, you had to use a little hammer to adjust the depth of your cut
Right.
and side-to-side movement. Where these planes all had that mechanical part, it was much more reliable as far as getting the perfect adjustment you needed.
But I
that's
thought
what-
I'd read one time that they purposely did the metal and wood combination to get guys over the hump of loving wood versus
Well,
just
when
going
you use a
straight to
plane
metal.
like this, this is like a 4.5 Stanley size, and it's what they call a raisin style in the back, where your center of gravity is lower for the handle. The condition is fabulous when you look at the bottom. Okay, that's beechwood, perfectly smooth and flat, no cracks, a nice crisp mouth on it. and you have all the adjustments here that the metal plane would have. When you take this to a piece of wood, it's lighter than all steel, and it just sails across the wood. It's a whole different feel than having a metal plane. And so woodworkers definitely have preference sometimes over a wooden bottom plane over a metal body plane.
Okay.
And so it's not just to get that over that hump and transition, there's a preference in the way it felt when you were using it. And there definitely is something about that.
Do you have one of the bedrock planes?
I don't have any bedrocks here, no. I sell a lot of those on eBay when I find them. They're very hard to find because in reality, most woodworkers didn't see the need for the extra expense for a bedrock.
Right.
The normal Bailey plane, this is the Bailey plane. It would, after 1900, when Bailey passed away, to commemorate him, they put his name on the plane, was the professional model Stanley plane. As opposed to, they did have other planes Stanley made, like the Stanley Handyman, which was more of a homeowner's version.
Right.
The quality on the Bailey was a little bit better as far as the machining and the fit of it. Most woodworkers didn't find the needed expense to go buy a bedrock.
Right.
Because the Bailey did everything that they needed to do.
Was there a Mr. Bedrock like there was a Mr. Bailey?
No, there wasn't.
No?
But what the whole idea of the bedrock is, they're saying, is how firmly the frog is attached to the base. And that was the whole idea. And what Stanley did, and a lot of it was marketing. Sargent came out with a new design for their frog to mate it to the base. Right away, Stanley had to come out with another way of doing theirs also. And so it was marketing ploy. And a lot of the things that you'll find on these planes, whether it's the lateral adjuster or whether it's the little kidney shape in here, a lot of it really was for marketing, to make it sound like it was new and innovative.
But in reality, you can get a Stanley Handyman. If it's really sharp, you're going to get pretty much the same results.
You're going to get good results out of it.
The key is the sharpening
It's
and the setting.
the tuning up.
Yes.
It's the tuning up the frog, tuning up the blade, the chip breaker,
Right.
the throat. You know, I go through for my planes about 10 different steps on a smoothing plane. Here's a Type 11 here that's from World War I vintage. One of the first things I'll do is I'll flatten the bottom on a smoothing plane. So the bottom is all hand flattened, just on sandpaper, on machine surface, and I just go back and forth when I retract the blade. Everything is left on the plane.
Then what do you do?
Then I'm going to flatten the frog. I can still see machinist marks on there when it came from the factory. But some of those are taken out when I flatten that out. Again, with sandpaper on a machine surface. The bottom of the frog is flattened, and the machine areas that are on the base of the plane are also flattened. And so the frog has some attention paid to it. I'm working on flattening out this surface, which is actually the blade bottom that fits onto the frog. The blade itself, as you can see on some of these, that surface is all flattened out.
Right. How do you sharpen these, by machine or by hand?
These are done by machine.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm using a rotary sanding machine.
Oh, yeah, okay.
With very fine grit, like the Veritas
Yes,
ones.
yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Okay, and that way you can get those perfectly flat. And then the chip breaker is also paid attention to, so that the bottom matches the blade, but also the front right here is smoothed out so that the chips can fly over it.
Yeah.
So everything is gone over, about 10 different steps. I clean it all up. The wood is all reconditioned, and I'll use a lot of times paste wax on it to protect it from moisture,
Right.
so you don't get any flash rusting on it.
Right.
And a plane like this one here is $95 as compared to one that maybe Lee Nielsen might be $300 and some dollars, but it's been tuned up and it'll work just as good as a Lee Nielsen,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
How about some of these other specialty planes like that, the circular plane?
The circular plane is one that many woodworkers have never seen. And the idea of a circular plane is that you can adjust this, and it has a flexible sole to it. So now I'm going to be able to cut a concave curve.
Now, who was using these? I was thinking like boat builders.
Boat builders. I worked, when I retired from teaching, I worked on Chris Craft boats, and we use these a lot on the Chris Crafts and the Garwood boats.
Right.
But also, if you think about some of the window trim on the old colonial houses were curved.
Right.
And so they would have used it for that as well. And so people, the old carpenters that did trim work, and also furniture makers. You know, if you think of a rocking chair,
Yeah.
okay, the bottoms of the rocker would have used these.
How about Coopers?
Coopers had their own wooden planes that they used. Okay, so they didn't use these as much. They had their own specialty planes. Other planes that would be used, the old scrub planes. You can see that big mouth in there that's used for doing very rough work.
Right.
When you get a piece of wood that might be 5/4 rough sawn and you want to get it down to 1 inch, you'll get a scrub plane like that. Of course, before the metal ones were the wooden ones for the same purpose. Of course, one of the specialties that all woodworkers need are your block planes.
That's probably the most common, right?
This is the most common ones. This
Maybe a 4 and a 5.
Well, this is a low angle. Yeah. So what you can notice here is that the angle of the blade on this one is much lower than the angle on the right. So this is your common angle right here. But these are one of my favorite block planes because there's 3 adjustments on it. One is that you have a throat adjustment right here. And by moving this little lever in the front, I can open and close the mouth. So if I want to take fine shavings, maybe from the top of the wood, I'll close the mouth up.
Yeah.
If I want to chamfer a piece of wood, I can open up to take a thicker shaving, and I can lock that in. It also has your lateral adjuster for moving the blade side to side to square that up. So it has the lateral, and then it has the post vertical depth adjuster.
Yeah.
And when a block plane has all 3 of those, that makes it a very, very versatile plane to use. Not that you need a low angle. This one can do most of the work that a low angle block plane can do.
How about some of these big planes, the 7s and the 8s?
These are joiner planes, and they have a lot of use for tabletops, flattening the tabletops out, maybe jointing a piece of wood when you want to put 2 planks of wood together and to joint them. You can use them for that. This is a number 7. I don't have a number 8. I have one here and I sold it. The number 8 is almost too big for most people to use. It's very heavy, and if you're not a hand plane user, it's going to get uncomfortable and it's going to tire you out. Where the 7 is one that you can definitely hold, you can use it, and you're not going to fatigue when you're using it. That's why I like a number 7 over a number 8. Particularly for people who aren't using planes every day.
Right.
And these are hard to find in good condition because they were a lot of times put under very heavy work. And so a lot of times you'll find these with chips in the mouth. You might find a crack in the side. Obviously because you are so heavy and so big, they got knocked off the tables a lot.
Right. Let's talk about your saws a little bit. Your saw till here.
Sure. First you have your hand saws. And so a hand saw like this, all these saws are all restored and sharpened by hand. This is number 12, goes back to sometime around 1900 to 1917. It has a nice etch right in here. And this one has applewood handle with vine carvings in it. And it's a cross cut. And one of the things about all my saws is that when you sight down a saw, you'll see that it's perfectly straight and all the teeth are all in alignment. Some of the saws, such as this one, was the top of the line. This is a Victory saw, a D15. This one was made around 1925 to 1930. Has a rosewood handle, has an etch in here of the eagle carrying a cracked Liberty Bell. It's going to be kind of hard to get that. But there is that eagle in there. You can see the flags in the background. There's the eagle carrying. Yeah, you can make it out. Thing is, it's a very high polish to the blade. Some of the saws are cross cut. Some of them are ripped. If I look over here, I can see another rosewood one. and different lengths. The average length on the saw is 26 inches, but this is a beautiful saw with an applewood handle made by Richardson as a 22-inch length. And not only for smaller people like children, teenagers, or women to use a saw like this, but even people who don't use a saw every day, a fine-tooth saw like this that's shorter gives you more control. It feels like an extension of your hand. And so that's what's nice. This one here is a 12-point saw. The average crosscut saw is an 8-point, 8 points per inch. This is 12 points per inch used for fine cabinetry work.
Okay.
It's going to leave a very fine cut.
How about this giant one on the floor here, this back saw?
This saw is one of the biggest back saws that I've seen. It's a distance saw, and it goes with the large miter box up here. It's a Stanley miter box. And it's all complete and original, going to about probably 1920s.
And we had one of these in my high school shop class.
No, I did as well, and they work great. Much safer than using a chop saw, particularly for smaller wood and for the accuracy.
Right.
And this saw goes up, fits right up into that miter box, and again, it's all sharpened up and ready to go, in perfect condition.
Right.
Hard to find these back saws that match up to the miter boxes.
Let's go on to the braces.
There are many different kinds of braces.
These are catching my eye.
Okay.
Because it seems like they went through the Industrial Revolution also, and they went from
Right.
wood to metal.
These are usually called Sheffield braces, made in Sheffield, England, and were very famous for this design. Some of them were plated with brass on them, a little more rare to find. It has a button chuck on the end that I push the button. There's a little lever in there that releases that I can lock the bit in. Where some of them, probably an American one, this was actually one that was used by a cooper. No, probably a chair maker. Looking at it now.
That's called a spoon bit, right?
It's a spoon bit. So most likely used by a chair maker. The Coopers would have had a much bigger head. But that's all wood in great condition. Again, beech wood. They use beech wood a lot for the wood for their tools, for their planes and their braces here in the United States.
All right. And then at what point in time did they go over to the metal version?
I would say right around the Civil War here in the U.S. Because of the industry that was developed during the Civil War, they started using metal for their planes, much sturdier. It did go back a little bit earlier in Scotland and Glasgow and even in England and some of the areas with their carriage makers braces, because the wood was not strong enough and the metal was a much stronger brace. Even the penny braces that came from England. But really in America is where they developed this with the ratcheting mechanism and all of this one here. This is a Stanley 923, probably one of the better ones that were made, as well as the Miller Falls one. Starting from the top, you can look at it, it has rosewood, a rosewood grip to it. You spin that head and it just goes. There's ball bearings in there. And so that head is riding on ball bearings. There's a little oiling spout right there for it. Okay. It has a nice ratcheting mechanism in here.
Are these things still manufactured?
Well, they're not to this quality. Usually they're cheaper, made in China.
Okay.
You're gonna have a hard time finding this kind of quality.
Stanley doesn't make them anymore?
No. They do, but not to this quality.
Okay.
They might have a cheap plastic head to them. It's just not going to be the quality you're seeing here.
Okay.
Right? And one of the important parts on these were the jaws. Is that you have these spring jaws on the inside. Okay, where the spring locks them in. These are tool steel. That's hardened steel. They're not going to wear out. Okay, so you make sure that you have good jaws in there, and a ratcheting mechanism is very helpful. And everything should close up nice and tight. Then when you look at the jaws here at the end, you'll see that they do close all the way.
Right, okay.
And some of them are very small. You know, when you look at one like this, you can see that has a much bigger sweep for drilling larger holes as compared to a smaller one like that, where this one's for doing smaller work.
Is that for also like teenagers and high school kids?
No. This is particularly made for doing smaller work. Okay, I would say that in reality, you would, if you don't have the strength, you want a bigger sweep because you have more leverage.
Yeah.
Okay, But your average size is right around 8 inches. Okay, that's your average size for your braces.
Let's move on to the chisels. You got a heck of a
lot of chisels here.
chisel collection here.
And these is a box of mortising chisels. You can tell the mortising chisels, you can see, is the width in here. That these can be pounded. You drill holes, you pound these into the corners, you can pry with these, and you're not going to bend. So that's the whole idea of mortising chisels. You have bevel edge chisels. Okay.
Now is to help with dovetailing?
These do help with dovetailing to get into the corners.
Right.
It's for your finer work. And most of these chisels I've gotten here are either Sheffield, because Sheffield steel was primo back in the 1800s, early 1900s, or your early New England makers like Jennings and James Swan and Witherby, the Stanley ones, they're Sargent, very good New England makers. Some of the chisels are larger in size for doing big framing work. I'll sell these to people that are doing timber framing or boat building. Big slicks like this.
That's definitely timber framing stuff.
Not to be hit, but you're putting up against your shoulder or into your hip when you're driving it and you're paring with this, like you would with a paring chisel. Just taking a little bit off at a time.
All right. Let's go back to that fancy spoke shave you were telling me about. The folding spoke shave.
Yeah, these, a regular draw knife, when you throw the regular draw knife into your toolbox, you're going to chip the edge. But when you reach into it, you're going to cut yourself with an exposed edge like that. So a lot of times they would fit a piece of wood across there to protect that edge. Well, what the manufacturers did is they came out with folding handles to protect the edges. And so
Very clever.
this way it folds out and can be locked in. There's a groove right in the handle that fits right over the blade and protects the blade and stops you from getting cut.
Ingenious.
You can bring this out at different angles and lock it in. So now that's nice and sturdy. That's a very good sturdy one. And most of your draw knife makers, I would say by the 1900s, 1910, they came out with variations of the folding draw knives because they were very popular for the woodworkers of the time.
So I call that a spoke shaver.
It's a draw knife.
Pardon, it's a draw knife. Do you have spoke shaves also?
Yes, my spoke shaves are a whole box of them over here. These are all types. There's some brand new ones that Stanley just got back to making again. And you have some of the antique ones by various makers, including Stanley. You have the Miller Falls, what they call the cigar ones for doing curvature work. And these are, this one here, when you tighten up this nut in the top, there's springs in here that adjust your throat. So that can get either coarser or finer cuts out of that. Some of the spoke shaves are just made for doing chamfering work. And so you have the little curved cutters in left and right side for doing chamfering. So there's a wide variety of metal spoke shaves, but what I really like as well are the antique wooden ones. And you get these old wooden spoke shaves that are tuned up and ready to work again.
So everything you sell is already sharp and ready to go.
These are. And I've gone through these and I've taken the blades out, I've sharpened them up, put them back in, I set them, and get them back into working condition. So you got a good variety, like as far as your T-bevels, probably the best made ones that have the adjustment on the bottom that pull it down and lock it in. That's a very sturdy, firm grip to it now.
Yeah.
And what's nice about this is whatever I lock it in at an angle, up in here there's nothing in the way.
Yep.
You know, on some of the other styles,
And you can
have
tuck it
that
into
big
a corner.
you have that big wing nut that's in here.
Right.
Okay, that sometimes gets in the way.
Yep.
And so that's what's nice with having this style. Harder to find these Stanley I think they're number 18s. You'll find ones like this a lot more often. And they do work well, but sometimes that big wing nut at the top could be in the way, but it does lock it in and work very well.
How about the egg beaters? Is there interesting history on these?
There's a lot of different varieties of these, but probably the best ones are the Stanley ones and the Miller Falls. But there are a lot of them. And sometimes I put the side handles on. I don't understand why. You're never really going to hold it and use that side handle that way as much. But the main thing I'm looking on these is I like that it has the 2 gears here. That's an idler gear. And it just helps to smooth things out. It balances out the gears.
Yeah.
And so what you want to see is, does it smoothly spin? Are all the gear teeth in place, right? Is this juncture right here of the wooden handle to the metal frame good and tight? And that are the jaws in good shape? When I close this up, it should come to very, very tight closure for even the smallest drill bits of, say, a 1/16 of an inch would be held tightly in there. Sometimes you'll find the old-fashioned ones like this where it opens up and you have bit storage inside.
Oh, clever, yeah.
So you have a lot of different of your drill bits all handy whenever you're using your drill. And
what are the push drills? There's traditional push drills. I mean, there's
push drills. I'm looking for, here they are. As a shop teacher, I kept these in my tool cabinet of about 5 different ones with different size drill bits in the end. So all a student had to do is go over there and grab the size they need.
Right.
They never had to worry about adjusting it. Okay, but some of these you could put any kind of drill bit in there.
Yeah.
Because this one twists. But the idea here is there's a spring in there, and when I'm pressing down, it's going to spin and drill a hole.
Yeah.
And so these were very, very handy to have in the shop.
They were used with screwdrivers also, right?
Not these. These are particularly made for drills.
Okay.
These type are very similar to
That's
that.
the one I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and these were used as a drill.
Yeah, and you can lock it left and right.
Yeah, I'm trying to get
Forward and reverse.
okay. So this one here has that
these.
Archimedes screw in there. That, and, you know, I worked, like I said, on Chris Craft boats. I couldn't imagine back in the 20s with the thousands of screws that went into a Chris Craft. This is what they had to use.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, these are the old-fashioned screwdrivers. That, and sometimes I like the little small ones. They are very handy.
Okay.
And a good variety of stuff here. Saw sets. If you're working on sharpening saws, one of the things you're going to need is a tool to set the teeth. Every other tooth is bent, you know, so every other tooth is bent one way. I turn the saw around, then I bend the tooth the other way. That gives you the clearance when you're doing your saw work. Particularly tricky is when you're working with a saw that has very small teeth. You know, these might be 15 teeth per inch. And you'll need a very good saw set to bend those small little teeth. And they have to be very accurate as far as how much bending you're doing so that they're all even down the line. And that's where these Stanley ones come into play. They were very well made, with the Morel was also a very good saw set. So you need those.
The thing that I have always captured my eye is these rawhide hammers. And those primary users for that.
Well, the good thing with these here is
it's
they're
kind of
not,
like an old style dead blow hammer.
yeah, they're not going to mark the material.
Right.
You know, so when you're knocking, it's all steel up in the top here, good cast iron, so it has a lot of weight to it. But when you're hitting the wood, it's not going to mar the wood because of the softer material of the rawhide. And then when that gets mushroomed and worn out, you just replace the rawhide. So you can just loosen this nut up, take it apart, put the new rawhide back in there, and tighten it up. And they do come in different sizes. Okay, so these are very handy mallets to have. Other tools people like are these hand crank grinders. You say, well, why would you want to use a hand crank grinder? Well, a regular motorized grinder spins very fast. And if you take your chisel and you're trying to get that sharpened up a little bit or taking a nick out of it, it can overheat the metal and take the temper out of the steel.
Right.
Using a hand crank grinder, it doesn't turn that fast and you're never going to have that issue.
And if you're on a job site, you could just
No electricity.
Yeah, no electricity. You can just put that on.
You can just clamp that on the back of the bumper. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so these are very handy to have out in a shed or if you're even in a shop. It takes a little bit of trick to kind of hold it with one hand and to turn the crank with the other. But
Right. That's
you
what
can
the
see that
furnace
it's smooth.
Yeah.
You know, it has an oiling spout in here to oil the gears inside there. This is a Luther, which is one of the top makes on these.
You got little brass hammers here for adjusting the planes, right?
Yeah, that's what these are for. These are for your molding planes.
Yeah.
And that way when you're tapping onto the cutters, you're not going to peen them over. Different drill bits. These are called center bits. It's a whole set.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen these. This is a very interesting,
You
design.
You don't see them a lot, but they work very, very well for general woodworking and furniture making. And these are all sharpened up and ready to go.
Okay. How about the little plumb blob collection?
I know many guys that collect plumb bobs just for their artistry.
Right.
You know, they're just very, very beautiful, using brass, using steel. Some of them are nickel plated. And so in the case here, I set up a display that could be a shelf like in an office.
Yeah.
You know, and just put it on there. I also have individual ones that I sell, but sometimes I also like making little displays up for the collector. These are something that I really like, are the old Machinist boxes. This one here is one that was homemade, I think. Right, so you can see that, just a really nice Machinist box, and I got it with Machinist tools in there. You know, it's just something that I keep small parts that are for sale. Some of the older patented, you know, the original Stilson wrench, you know, the old rigid little pipe wrench. There's some other cooler ones that are patented as well. And different sharpening stones, all the different tape measures. I mean, they didn't come out with tape measures until the 1920s. These are some of the very first ones that they came out with, these little pocket ones like this.
Prior to that, it was the folding.
It was folding rules, what they had to use. And these are the old tape measures with leather case on it.
And what's in this one then?
Some more small tools. And this is actually a manufactured machinist chest with felt on the inside. So these are nice for putting small tools in, but they're also very handy for if you collect tools for putting, like, I collect pen knives. And I have a whole collection of pen knives that I have in one of these machinist chests. My wife has one she uses for her jewelry. And so these are very handy little boxes to have, whether it's for your small tools in your shop or whether it's for your smaller
Got it
collectibles.
so well organized. I've never seen one of these. It's a leg inside caliber, right?
Yeah, it's ladies' legs,
Ladies'
they call
legs.
them. And, you know, some machinists years ago just started playing around with the design, and I see many of these that are homemade.
Amazing. What's this thing?
This here, it's just a scale for doing layout work. You know, it's metric. It's a more modern one. I want to say maybe Bridge City or Veritas. I think it's Veritas. Was that Bridge City? That's a Bridge City piece.
Okay, yeah, they make nice stuff.
Yeah. These are something you don't see that many times. It's a hatchet like a broad axe. What I mean by that is when you look down, is that this side is perfectly flat, like a broad axe would be, where this side is angled in. And so there's the bevel edge right there, but not on the other side. And duck decoy carvers and other carvers like using these for shaving. And so they're going to use this more of a shaving tool, okay? And I remember seeing duck decoy workers using axes like this one. I didn't keep that handle in there on purpose because it can be put in this way for right-handed work, or I can take it and turn it around, and someone that does left-handed work can use it because it is symmetrical, like a regular broad axe.
I know there's a couple log cabins, houses in this area, but do you get much demand for broad axes and
I do.
the slicks?
Collectors, but also users. There are people that are doing timber framing, you know, and I've had people come down from New York and from Pennsylvania that are timber framers looking for the big slicks like this, or for the big axes. they'll want an axe like this for taking the round timbers and turning them into your logs for timber framing.
Yeah, guys that use these didn't have any trouble with insomnia.
No. You're taking this here, and you might turn. I know a guy that was telling me that his dad made railroad ties back in the 20s and the 30s during the Depression. He might make 20 railroad ties a day.
Oh my gosh.
But you're working 12 to 14 hour days.
Yeah.
That's when you had a really good night's sleep.
Yeah. There wasn't any fat carpenters.
I think
This guy's got plenty of workout.
Yeah, the average might have been more like around 12 a day. But he says dad on a good day could do almost 18 to 20 a day.
Here's another thing that would give you a heck of a workout.
Oh, that big auger.
Oh my gosh.
Well, look at the Japanese saw over there.
And what was that for?
That was for taking timbers and ripping them down the length. They would be up on big sawhorses, and he would stand up on top of the log and work his way right down the log, ripping the piece of wood. That's a very old antique Japanese rip saw. So that's it. And then there's different tools down here. Woodworkers need bench vices, and that's a Craftsman, a very good one. It's a Colombian, quick acting with the dogs in them. Mm-hmm. And so those are very, very good. Woodworkers always need your clamps. These are good Jorgensen clamps.
Good old hand screw clamps.
These F clamps, again, good Jorgensen clamps. Mm-hmm. Some of these are just hard to find today, that quality. They're not making them in America because of the cost that it would be. I mean, I'm selling these for $10 to $15 a piece. That's $15 for the larger ones. Mm-hmm. You can't buy this kind of quality now
right.
For $15 a piece. They just stopped making them here in the U.S.
Oh, yeah, you got some more down here.
All along here are big clamps. Just how sturdy these are. You look at, and this is just a really, really good made in Long Island City in New York.
Well, Bob, you got one heck of a collection, a very interesting business. Thanks so much for allowing me to come over and spend some time with you.
Thanks for stopping by, Bob. I appreciate it.
Yep. All right. Let's wrap it up. Thank you.
You're welcome.